Terraria is just one of those games that you could spend hours upon hours in. I personally have almost spent 3,000 hours combined between the modded and vanilla versions of Terraria. While there are many ways to play Terraria, I think no challenge is more iconic than the Master Mode Summoner playthrough. That's why I wanted to spend 100 plus days in Terraria Master Mode as a summoner to take on this beloved and grueling challenge. Now, before we get into the video, I wanted to go over some of the rules and also the goals of this playthrough. The damage I do to enemies can only come from weapons that have summon damage listed on their item cards. This means whips, minions, sentries, and occasionally mounts. However, I will also be allowing damage from things like tools and the Shield of Cthulhu, as they are almost always accidental. Now, the goals for this playthrough are as follows: beating all of the bosses and events in the game and obtaining all minions and whips. Now, without further ado, let's begin. So we start off day one just as any other by getting some wood. Now, because this is a summoner playthrough, we don't start off with a weapon, and we're going to either need to finesse a little bit or get lucky to get our first weapon. So I decide to go exploring a little bit. And when exploring to the right, I actually end up finding a living wood tree, which, when I explore down, actually ends up having our first weapon in it, which is a finch staff. Now, the finch staff isn't very good, it's pretty weak, but it's the best we got at this point, so we gotta make it work. After spending the rest of day one exploring around a bit more and not finding much, I end up spending the night building a house for NPCs to start moving in, as well as protecting myself from the enemies at night. Day two, I don't really spend doing much. I tried exploring to the right a little bit and had trouble because of being blocked by enemies. Like I said, the finch staff isn't very good. We'll deal with that later, so I decide to spend the rest of day two working on a crafting/storage area for organizing my items later, as it's easy for items to get lost in random chests if you don't have a dedicated storage organization area. On day three, a traveling merchant actually showed up, and he had this red cape that I really wanted, but I couldn't afford it sadly. So I decided to explore to the left in a cave that I had found earlier to see if I could gather some stuff to make some money for this cape. And when exploring the cave, I actually ended up finding a enchanted sword shrine in the cave. Normally you find these on the outer edges of the world in these special shrine generation things, but you can actually find them underground, but it's really rare. So it was really funny to find this and kind of depressing to find this as a summoner character, not a melee character. So I decided to head back home right away and sell it to the traveling merchant so that I can finally afford the cape. So at least it serves some sort of purpose. And then the rest of the night I just spent exploring underground. It took a while because just having the finch staff makes it really hard to explore, as you can see right here. On day four, I went to the right to explore the jungle, and I died really quickly, so I decided to just finish off the rest of the day with some house building. On day five, the zoologist actually finally moved in. However, she moved into the cave home and she was next to the demolitionist, and both of those things make her very unhappy, so she was selling the leather whip for an insanely inflated price. So I had to wait for her to move back to the surface, and while I was waiting, I decided to do some mining and actually found the ice biome, and I found a lot of loot there. And after it turned to night, I came back with all my loot, and I was able to finally buy the leather whip for an actual reasonable price. On day 6, I spent all of it just exploring the ice biome and dying a lot. On day 7, I tried to explore the jungle again, and I died a lot, so I just went back to the underground snow biome and actually found the blizzard in a bottle, thankfully. So on day 8, while exploring the underground, I end up finding this trap chest, and while trying to disarm it, I'm not exactly sure what happens. I guess I accidentally click on it or something. It was kind of BS, but I also thought it was really funny, so I thought I'd include it for you guys, because it was just absolutely ridiculous. And later, while exploring the underground ice biome, I end up finding a slime statue, which is absolutely perfect, because finding the slime staff is really hard. It's such a rare item in this game, so getting a slime statue to where you can just set up a slime farm to get it is really nice to find. And later, I also end up finding an area where I feel like it'll be good for farming enemies. So I end up just posting up there and farming flinxes until I can get enough flinx to get the flinx summon staff, so I can finally have a better summon. On days 9 through 10, I tried to explore the jungle biome, and you can see what happens. And then finally, at the end of day 10, after so much searching, I end up finding a jungle shrine with the feral claws. You can see that I was so nervous that I accidentally clicked deposit all instead of loot all. The Feral Claws are really important because they allow for auto swing on the whip, so I don't have to click individually. And I also, in this jungle exploring, gathered enough materials to finally make the Snapthorn, which is our next upgrade from the Leather Whip. On day 11, I actually went to go to explore the underground desert. I wanted to find both the Golfer NPC and the Magic Conch. The Magic Conch lets you teleport to either ocean, depending on where you are in the map. I ended up finding the Golfer NPC pretty quickly, and then I died right after, to no one's surprise. Later on, when I was on my way back to pick up the money that I dropped, I ended up finding the Magic Conch pretty easily. On day 12, I just built some more houses. Nothing much to see here. On day 13, I made some Spelunker potions for exploring, and I ended up using it to go back to the ice biome to find some gold, as well as bringing a water candle I got from the dungeon to farm more flinxes. On day 14, I was still in the underground ice biome farming for flinxes to get that flinx fur. When I was finally able to gather enough flinx fur, I ended up coming back home and making the flinx fur coat, which gives you an extra minion slot as well as giving you a little bit of extra minion damage. The rest of day 14, I started making an arena to fight the Eye of Cthulhu, and then later I went to start digging out a Hellevator. On day 15, I was continuing the Hellevator, and I ended up finding a spider nest which had the stylus in it, and after digging down a little more, I also ended up finding a mushroom biome. So on day 16, I was working more in the Hellevator, and then suddenly, when I wasn't recording, the Eye of Cthulhu decided to spawn. I must have not been paying attention or something. So here's the fight, unedited. Enjoy. Day 17 was a real hodgepodge of things. I ended up working on the Hellevator more. I got some obsidian ready to mine for later. I ended up working on some fishing quests for the angler. And I ended up working on houses more and developing the pylon network more, as that's going to be very important for teleporting throughout our world later. Day 18 started off with some nice and peaceful fishing, and then later on I wanted to go take on the Brain of Cthulhu. Now, the Brain of Cthulhu is really interesting as a boss, as you don't actually need to defeat it to progress into the game. It spawns these little enemies called creepers, and if you defeat them, they'll drop the items that you need to make the new tools to progress into the game. So you don't actually need to defeat the Brain of Cthulhu to progress, and that's sort of what I was demonstrating here. Realistically, I probably could have beaten the Brain of Cthulhu at this point, but I decided to just show off the progression skip. On day 19, I did a fishing quest as always, and I decided to spend the rest of the day working on the elevator. Since I finally had the Deathbringer pickaxe, it just goes way, way faster, and I can finally mine up some of that obsidian that I prepared earlier. Later on, when night finally came, a blood moon happened, and I was really excited because I was waiting for one of these for a really long time. Blood moon enemies drop so many important items, including a bloody tear, which will force a blood moon to spawn on any night that you choose, a money trough, which is basically a floating portable piggy bank, which is really great for extending your inventory space, as well as storing your money on the go so you don't lose it when you die, and the shark tooth necklace, which actually adds armor penetration to all your attacks, which is very useful for hard mode when enemies have really high defense. Unfortunately, throughout the night, we only got a bloody tear, and that's about it, but we have more blood moons in the future to farm. And on day 20, after days and days of digging down, we finally make it to Hell. Now, the moment I get to Hell, I immediately rush to the right to find a Hellforge. The Hellforge is needed to make the next armor set, which is the Obsidian armor set. Now, the Obsidian armor set is a pretty special armor set in that even though you can get it directly after beating the Brain of Cthulhu, or even without beating the Brain of Cthulhu or Eater of Worlds, it gives you only one additional minion, but 31% bonus minion damage, as well as an insane increase to your whip's damage with a 35% increase in attack speed and a 50% range increase. This probably makes it one of the best summoner armor sets in the game, even considering some of the endgame armors, as even though you're losing out on a bit of defense, the later game armor sets don't give you that much defense in the first place, and that extra whip range is just too useful not to use. On day 21, I basically spend the entire day and night working on a fishing area for the underground jungle biome. This is going to be really important throughout the game, as we're going to need to be fishing a lot here, and I want a big area that is also low on enemy spawns so I can fish uninterrupted. A big reason we'd need an area like this is because one of the most important items for a summoner playthrough is an item called the variegated lardfish, which is fished up in the underground jungle biome. This plus a moon glow will make a summon potion, which gives you an additional summon. This is obviously really important because in master mode you cannot leave any DPS on the table, especially not when it comes to the summoner class. Another thing is I want to make sure this pool is big enough so that we have an increased chance of fishing up rare items like the frog leg, which gives you increased jump height as well as increased jump velocity for later on in the game when movement speed becomes very, very important for dodging attacks. At the beginning of day 22, we finally get invaded by a goblin invasion. At this point in the game, we have some really powerful gear, so we kind of are able to mow through them without too much trouble, thankfully. Afterwards, I end up buying this flamingo mount right from the zoologist because I think it'll let me move faster. But then after completing a fishing quest from the angler, I ended up getting the fuzzy carrot, which gives you a bunny mount that's actually faster than the flamingo, so it was a total waste to purchase. At the end of the night, we end up finding the Goblin Tinkerer. He's one of the most important NPCs in the game, as he lets you reforge your items to get better stat bonuses, as well as sells an item called the Tinkerer's Workshop, which lets you combine your accessories in order to make more effective accessories. On day 23, I do some more exploring of the underground, and I finally find an item I was looking for, the Lucky Horseshoe. This item negates all fall damage, and it can be combined with some other accessories later to make some really powerful movement items. Later on, I realized at this point that it's probably time I go get some Hellstone so I can finally upgrade my summon. I really wasn't thinking about it much because the obsidian armor plus the whips at this point in the game are just really, really strong, and you honestly don't even need a summon. But at this point, it was time to upgrade, so I go into Hell and I get some Hellstone, and I come back so I can make the Imp Staff, which is the most powerful summon you can get pre-hard mode in this game, and it's just a pretty good summon overall. On day 23, I decide to end the night by looking for some sky islands. I'm looking for an item called the Red Shiny Balloon, as when you combine this with the Double Jump Bottle and then combine that with the Lucky Horseshoe, you combine all the items' effects into one, and it just makes a really good item for pre-hard mode. On day 24, I start off the day by finally beating the Brain of Cthulhu. At this point, I felt like I was stalling it too long, and there was no real reason for me to not do it anymore, especially since I was so overpowered. We actually need to beat the Brain of Cthulhu in order to unlock a very important NPC for the Summoner playthrough, and that's the Tavern Keep. The Tavern Keep gives us access to an event called the Old One's Army event, and this is actually one of the most important things for the Summoner in the game, as it gives you access to a ton of sentries as well as some armors later in the game. Later in the day, I end up exploring the underground jungle biome a little bit, and I actually end up finding the Tavern Keep, which is nice. On day 25, we basically spend the entire time in the underground jungle trying to find that beehive so we can finally fight the queen bee. We spend so much time in the underground jungle just wandering around trying to find the hive, and it's being very elusive at this point, and I'm starting to feel like I'm just going to have to start digging randomly in order to find it. So, on day 26, we end up finally finding a beehive. However, when trying to construct the arena, this happens. I was quite frustrated with this because it took us a long time to find that hive, but thankfully at the end of the day, a blood moon happens so I can be distracted from that frustration a little bit. I end up spending most of the blood moon fishing in order to spawn some of the enemies that spawn exclusively from fishing in the blood moon, because they end up dropping a summon item we need to complete our collection, the vampire frog staff. And the rest of the blood moon, I end up farming more enemies to try and find some of those items that I mentioned earlier that I really wanted, like the money trough and the shark tooth necklace. Day 27 was a pretty simple day. I basically just spent most of the day fishing. Got a lot of variegated larvafish as well as some crates, and I did end up getting the frog leg, which was very nice. On day 28, we finally got a slime rain, so we got to defeat the king slime, which was pretty nice. I also ended up realizing that I'm kind of behind on the game progression, so I decided to set up a lot of stuff for the next few days. The rest of day 28 into day 29 were basically preparations I was making for the special plan I had for day 30. At this point in the game, I was starting to realize that we were kind of behind in terms of game progression. You know, I spent a lot of time doing prep work in order to be ready for hard mode, and that is really important because getting all this stuff done in normal mode when enemies are still weaker can make hard mode so much easier. However, for day 30, I had something different in mind. A boss rush. On day 31, I head to the dungeon and basically just stay here the entire day so I can gather all the items I need to get from the dungeon, as well as finding the mechanic and locating the biome chests that I'll need to know where they are for later in hard mode. Day 32 ends up being a pretty slow day. I just make a home in the snow biome for the goblin and the mechanic to live together, as this will be the optimal happiness for the goblin, which is really important since he is going to eat up most of my money throughout this playthrough. Later on, I wanted to work on making a herb farm, but then the blood moon spawns, so I have to deal with that. Day 33 also ends up being a pretty simple day. I end up spending the entire day gathering the materials and planning out the construction of the herb farm. This is going to be really important as we're going to need a lot of herbs for potions throughout the playthrough. Days 34 through 39 ends up being a lot of the stuff we've seen already, so I'm just going to give a quick summation of those days. We start off exploring through Hell and clearing out some of the obstacles that are there so I can form a Hell bridge and prep for our fight of the final boss of easy mode, the Wall of Flesh. Later I end up reforging my items, just so I can have the best possible reforges going into the Wall of Flesh fight later on. I also end up doing a lot more fishing in order to gather up some more variegated larvafish, as I can never really have enough of these. Later on, I also end up farming the queen bee, as I kind of wanted some money, and also I wanted to get an item called the honeycomb. The honeycomb basically, when you get hit, allows you to release some bees, as well as gives you some honey life regeneration. Now, this item is really good because you can combine it with a shark tooth necklace, and then be able to wear 2 shark tooth necklaces at once. And finally, on day 40, after all the preparation of normal mode, I feel like we're finally ready to enter hard mode, so we take on the Wall of Flesh. The rest of day 40, I tried to kill the wall of flesh again, because I wanted to get the summoner's emblem and the whip from the wall of flesh called the Firecracker. However, in the middle of the fight, I got killed by an underworld mimic, unfortunately. So, that scraps that. On day 41, I killed the wall of flesh a few more times, and I finally got the stuff that I needed. And then later on, I went to go farm a spider nest, as the spiders that spawn there now drop fangs that'll allow me to craft my next armor set, as well as my next summon minion, a little spider boy. Day 42 was more farming. I ended up heading back to the spider's nest, as this was in a hollowed, infected area, so the spiders also dropped souls of light. I went to the corruption to break some altars with the hammer that I got from the wall of flesh in order for the hard moored ores to start spawning, so I can grind them out later. And then later I went to the ice biome as it was raining, so there was a blizzard going on in this ice biome, and frost giants spawn, and they drop some items that I need, like an ice feather for some frost wings and a frost core for the cool whip, which is the next whip for the summoner. Day 43 was a lot of exploring underground in the underground hollowed area. I was trying to get some of the hard mode ores as well as finding some gel crystals, because these will let us summon the next boss that we want to fight, the Queen Slime. Later on, I also went to the underground ice biome, as a portion of it had been infected with crimson in the underground. So enemies here drop Souls of Night, as well as an item called Ichor, which when I make an Ichor flask, it infuses my whip with the ability to basically debuff enemies and make them take more damage. On day 44, I finally farmed up enough materials to make the cool whip, and it was automatically legendary when I crafted it, which was pretty nice. And I basically spent the rest of the day killing some easy mode bosses in order to farm up some money for reforging my items. Day 45 through 46, unfortunately, I wasn't recording. I'm not exactly sure what was happening. Kind of an idiot. It was basically just enemy farming. I farmed the underground in order to find some mimics to get some Titan gloves, which can be combined with the Feral Claws in order to make an upgrade to the Feral Claws, as well as farming for fishing crates in the jungle in order to get more Feral Claws, as you can make 3 different upgrades of the Feral Claws and wear them all at the same time, and have greatly increased whip speed depending on the boss that you want to fight, which it might be necessary for upcoming boss fights. Day 47, I basically just spent the whole day fishing for more jungle crates in order to find 2 more versions of the Feral Claws. Day 48 ended up being a lot more soul farming. I really needed Souls of Night, because with enough of them you can make this soul key that when you put it into a chest, it forces crimson mimics to spawn, and these mimics drop a lot of really good items as well as better potions and lots of money. The rest of day 48 was also just farming these crimson mimics in order to get this item called the Flesh Knuckles, which was a part of a recipe in one of the upgrades to the Feral Claws. Day 49, I started construction on what I'm going to refer to as part of the world bridge. Basically, this is going to be a bridge spanning across my world. This is really going to be necessary for some of the hard mode boss fights, as you need to use as much space as possible in order to dodge attacks and run away. Day 50 arrived, and it's finally time to take on our first hard mode boss, aka Queen Slime. Queen Slime was the first boss I wanted to take on because she's the easiest boss, or at least the lowest health boss in hard mode, and as well she drops a really important summon item called the Blade Staff, which is going to be very necessary for some of the fights we want to take on later. The first try with Queen Slime, unfortunately, I thought I was running out of space, and I made a panic move and tried to go the other direction, and I ended up getting killed. For the second try at the Queen Slime fight, well, I'll just show you what happened. So yeah, thankfully we completed Queen Slime. And therefore, that concludes part 1 of the Terraria Master Mode 100 Day Summoner series. I hope you enjoyed it so far, and I hope you'll return for part 2, which I'm hoping can come out in about a week. This is my first time working on a project like this ever, and it's been quite an undertaking personally, but I've really enjoyed it so far, and I hope all of you had enjoyed it as well. If you liked the video, please go ahead and subscribe and like the video, and let me know what you thought about it in the comments, good or bad, seriously. Any critique, I truly appreciate. If you want to join my Discord, that link is also in the description. I kind of post updates about the videos that I'm working on and other such things, as well as the streams that I do. So yeah, if you want to check any of that stuff out, link is always in the description. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I do hope you enjoyed the video. Peace out.